This is the story of a boy who had nothing. No money, no father, no opportunities. Everyone told him he would never succeed, but they were all wrong. This is the story of the boy who never gave up. The wind howled through the narrow streets of Ashwood, a quiet town tucked away in the hills of Colorado. It was late October, and the trees had already begun to surrender their golden leaves to the cold. At exactly 5 o'clock every morning, while most of the town was still asleep, a 14-year-old boy named Ethan Carter quietly climbed out of bed. His room was barely large enough for a small bed, a wooden desk, and a shelf filled with old library books. The wallpaper had faded years ago, and the ceiling leaked whenever it rained. But there was one thing in Ethan's room that never looked old: his dreams. Above his desk hung dozens of hand-drawn sketches of rockets, satellites, airplanes, and futuristic machines. Every page was carefully taped to the wall, creating a map of the future he imagined for himself. Ethan believed that one day he would build machines that could change the world. He just didn't know how. "Good morning, Mom," Ethan whispered as he walked into the tiny kitchen. His mother, Sarah Carter, smiled while pouring oatmeal into 2 bowls. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That's all we have until Friday." Ethan smiled anyway. "This is my favorite breakfast." The wind howled through the narrow streets of Ashwood, a quiet town tucked away in the hills of Colorado. It was late October, and the trees had already begun to surrender their golden leaves to the cold. At exactly 5 o'clock every morning, while most of the town was still asleep, a 14-year-old boy named Ethan Carter quietly climbed out of bed. His room was barely large enough for a small bed, a wooden desk, and a shelf filled with old library books. The wallpaper had faded years ago, and the ceiling leaked whenever it rained. But there was one thing in Ethan's room that never looked old: his dreams. Above his desk hung dozens of hand-drawn sketches of rockets, satellites, airplanes, and futuristic machines. Every page was carefully taped to the wall, creating a map of the future he imagined for himself. Ethan believed that one day he would build machines that could change the world. He just didn't know how. "Good morning, Mom," Ethan whispered as he walked into the tiny kitchen. His mother, Sarah Carter, smiled while pouring oatmeal into 2 bowls. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That's all we have until Friday." Ethan smiled anyway. "This is my favorite breakfast." They both knew it wasn't true, but pretending everything was okay had become part of their daily routine. 3 years earlier, Ethan's father, Daniel Carter, had died in a highway accident while driving home from work. Since then, life had become a constant battle. Sarah worked double shifts at a local nursing home. Even after working 12 hours a day, there were weeks when paying the rent felt impossible. Electric bills piled up. The old refrigerator barely worked. Sometimes they had to choose between buying groceries or paying for heating. Yet Sarah never complained. Neither did Ethan. Before the sun rose, Ethan grabbed a heavy bag filled with newspapers and climbed onto his rusty blue bicycle. The brakes squeaked. The chain slipped every few blocks, but it still carried him through the empty streets every morning. House after house, driveway after driveway, rain, snow, freezing wind. Nothing stopped him. As he rode through the wealthy neighborhoods, Ethan couldn't help noticing the enormous houses decorated with expensive cars and beautiful gardens. Sometimes children his age walked outside wearing brand new sneakers and carrying the latest phones. For just a moment, Ethan wondered what that life felt like. Then he smiled. Maybe one day. School wasn't much easier. Ashwood High School was filled with students whose families owned businesses, ranches, or successful companies. Most of them had never worried about missing dinner. Most had never worn the same shoes for 3 years. When Ethan walked through the hallway, whispers often followed him. "Look at his backpack. I think his shoes have holes again. Does he ever buy new clothes?" The comments hurt every single time, but Ethan had learned something important. People can only steal your confidence if you let them. So instead of arguing, he kept walking. There was only one place inside the school where Ethan truly felt at home: the library. Mrs. Emily Parker, the librarian, noticed him during his first week of school. Unlike everyone else, she never judged his appearance. She only noticed his curiosity. Every Tuesday, she saved science magazines that were about to be thrown away. Every Thursday, she placed engineering books on a table before Ethan arrived. You know, she told him one afternoon, the greatest inventors weren't born rich. Ethan looked up. They weren't? Mrs. Parker smiled. Many of them had nothing except determination. Those words stayed with Ethan. One rainy afternoon, while helping clean the library shelves, Ethan found an old biography of an engineer who had grown up in poverty before helping build spacecraft. The pages were yellow. The cover was torn. But the story inside changed everything. It wasn't just about intelligence. It was about persistence, failure after failure, rejection after rejection. And still, he kept going. Ethan borrowed the book that day. He read it 3 times in a single week. Then he started filling notebook after notebook with ideas. Small robots, flying drones, machines that could help firefighters, rescue robots, solar-powered devices. His imagination never rested. Every evening after school, Ethan worked 4 hours at Miller's grocery store. He stocked shelves, collected shopping carts, cleaned the floors, carried groceries for elderly customers. By the time he returned home, it was nearly 8 o'clock. Dinner was usually simple: soup, rice, sometimes only sandwiches. After eating, most teenagers would watch television or play video games. Ethan climbed into the attic instead. That dusty attic became his secret laboratory. Broken radios, old alarm clocks, discarded fans, damaged keyboards. Anything electronic that people threw away eventually found its way into Ethan's collection. He carefully took every device apart. He wanted to understand how things worked. Sometimes he spent hours just examining a tiny motor. Sometimes he failed to put everything back together. But every mistake taught him something new. One Saturday morning, Ethan visited the town recycling center. Most people saw piles of junk. Ethan saw possibilities: a broken toy car, a cracked drone frame, several small motors, copper wires, old batteries. He asked the manager if he could take the discarded parts. The old man laughed. "If you can carry them, they're yours." Ethan loaded everything onto his bicycle and rode home with the biggest smile he'd worn in months. His neighbors thought he was collecting trash. Only Ethan knew he was collecting pieces of his future. That night, as rain tapped against the windows, Sarah quietly climbed into the attic. She found Ethan sitting on the floor, surrounded by wires and tools. "What are you building?" she asked. Ethan looked up with bright eyes. "I'm not sure yet." She laughed. "What do you mean?" "I don't know exactly what it'll become, but I know it'll be something useful." Sarah gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "Your father used to say the same thing." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sarah reached into her pocket and handed Ethan a small metal box. "I found this while cleaning your father's closet." Inside the box was Daniel Carter's old mechanical watch, scratched from years of hard work. Tucked beneath it was a folded piece of paper. Ethan slowly unfolded it. In his father's handwriting were just 12 words: "Dreams so big that your fears become too small to stop you." Tears filled Ethan's eyes. He carefully folded the note and placed it inside his notebook. From that moment on, it became the promise he made to himself. No matter how difficult life became, no matter how many times he failed, he would never give up. Little did Ethan know. In just a few weeks, an announcement at school would change his life forever and test that promise in ways he could never imagine.